Get ready.
Hi, this is Kaz Riley, and this is the Hypnosis 247 Live Network, and this is Trancing in the Sheets. And today I've got a really, really interesting guest for you. But before I go over to him, just to let you know that when you join this network, that you received an email, you need to go and activate that, because when you do, you can get a $200 gift card, which means that you can get access to discounts off hotels, car hire, all kinds of wonderful things in all kinds of amazing destinations. So check your inbox, and if you'd like to know more about how travel cards and travel vouchers can help your business, then just put the word solutions in the box below. So trancing in the sheets with me today, I have an award-winning magician, mentalist, anthropologist, academic. He has spoken at several universities, Fortune 500 companies, has seen on many different kind of television shows like Porn Stars, Hell's Kitchen, and also has won many awards for documentaries and filmmaking. I'm really pleased to welcome Mr. Paul Draper to the show today. Thank you for coming on the show today, Paul.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Last time we saw each other was in Leeds, England. Now I'm in the wilds of Alaska. Where are you?
I'm in Huddersfield in Yorkshire, so not quite as wild and wonderful as Alaska, but it looks really beautiful there.
So it's a lot of fun. I'm here at a state fair in the States, and it's one of the 5 largest state fairs. We'll have about 30,000 people here, and it's exciting. They bring in big acts. I think tonight the band is Kansas, which they were an older big act, and Wayward Son was their big song, and they have comedian Jeff Foxworthy tomorrow. So, but it's great. So yeah, let's get talking.
Cool. So, I mean, anthropology is kind of your first background, isn't it? You know, that's
Right.
where you started out. And I know that you were looking at a lot of kind of cultural beliefs and religious beliefs. And
Right.
actually, they play into a lot of kind of beliefs with regards to kind of sex and sexual hang-ups and those kinds of things as well, don't they, you know?
Right. You know, it's we start off with our culture. Our culture is like, I often like to define culture as simply the way things are done here. And if you're going to be within someone's culture, you are taught the way things are done here and the way things are not done here. And that doesn't mean those things are right or wrong. It just means that that's the culture within which you are. Most people don't see their own culture like a fish swimming in a fishbowl. The fish doesn't see the water, but it's tasting it, breathing it, seeing it, in it all the time, and doesn't know the extent of what it is or where it is. It's just everything about it. It's fascinating when we introduce people to other cultures where things are different. I mean, the first time I met someone from Mongolia who was a traditionalist, and she said that the marriage that she was going to have was that she and her sister would be married to 2 brothers, and both sisters would be married to both brothers, and both would be the wife and both would be the husband. And that was just the way things were within their culture. That the fact that I grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah, where on my Mormon side, I have great grandparents who were a form of polygamy called polyamory, or polygyny, sorry, a form of polygamy called polygyny, where one man marries many women. And that was on my Mormon great grandfather's side. On my Jewish side, my Jewish grandfather was originally in an arranged marriage, where he and the wife were arranged, and just like Fiddler on the Roof, which is currently in England playing on the West End, starring Andy Nyman from Ghost Stories. I saw it when I was there. The Fiddler on the Roof. The question is always, but do you love me? Because it was the arranged marriage. I hear a plane going on overhead. Can you still hear me even with the
We can hear you fine, absolutely. Planes going overhead are absolutely fine.
So there are a lot of fires up here right now, and so the planes are coming by, dropping giant plane loads of water to put out the fires. I think global warming's real, you know.
Mm.
And though in my culture, certainly here in Alaska, they say, well, it's just cultural change, and it just comes in waves as the rainforest burns. But there's polyamory where one woman marries many men. There's many different forms and structures within culture of ways that we have relationships, and polygamy still exists both strongly in many Muslim cultures, and we find new ways all the time. One of the reasons for monogamy in culture was sometimes was so when we move from a hunter-gatherer society to a uh, king-based monarchy, that we don't want bastard children. We want to know whose they are, and different cultures do that differently too. In
Mm-hmm.
Judaism, the culture belongs to the child belongs to the mother. Whatever religion the mother is, that's the child, because we always know who the mother is. You're not always sure who the father is. Uh,
Yeah.
in in Christianity, the child is the religion of the father. And so, the first line, and this is how King Henry ends up having to kill so many wives, right? Get the right child, the male heir. So yes, our culture absolutely informs what sex looks like, who we can have it with, what marriage looks like, what our kinship modalities are. In the Polynesian Islands, sometimes all of your aunts and uncles, when you're raised as a child, are also your mom and your dad. And
Mm.
so all of the brothers are called dad and all of the sisters are called mom. And so a child is truly raised by a village.
It's absolutely fascinating, isn't it? How there are so many different cultures and belief systems around sex and sexuality. That's perfectly fine in one culture is dealt or received or seen to be shameful or wrong in another.
Oh,
And then
sure.
if we look that, of course, we're all humans, aren't we? So in
Right.
terms of how we behave, I'm guessing we have kind of very instinctual behaviors that just about every person would have. And some people are taught to embrace them, and some people are taught to fight them, depending on what their culture is.
Right.
Is that something you've observed with kind of your studies?
Oh, absolutely. And then horrible things like genital mutilation.
Mm.
Some places in Africa and in the Middle East, to women, they have genital mutilation that
Mm.
takes away their ability to feel a great deal of pleasure in relation to sex. And or that in some places in Africa, they have beliefs that to get rid of terrible diseases, sexual diseases, the right solution is to have sex with a virgin.
Yeah.
And in places in Judaism, my religion, we still have male circumcision as a requirement.
Mm.
It's nowhere near as bad as uh, genital mutilation in Africa, but is still right. The baby doesn't get a say. So yeah, the way we have our this is okay, this is not, this is accepted, this is not, this is expected, this is not, changes from culture to culture in a very big way. And the only way that we as humans persist is through sex.
Mm.
Uh, it makes it so it's a cornerstone of that birth, life, death cycle. One of my favorite stories of strange, bizarre, and unusual is a South American indigenous custom that was in one area where when the young boys came of age, the way that they learned about sex was they would place one woman in a sort of tent that was made of sticks that were leaned up against each other with a bunch of rocks on top, and all the boys would be shoved in there at once, and they were to have sex with her and then leave after they had. And when all the boys but one had left, the last boy and the woman, they would pull out the pegs and have the whole thing collapse and kill them both. And that way there would be no argument of which one of these boys impregnated her. And the weakest boy, the one who was the last to have sex, the one that wasn't able to go first and fight for it, would be killed. And so that's woo, right? So
That's
there are,
yeah, that's quite a story of survival of the fittest.
right? So
Yeah.
I mean, survival of the fittest has nothing to do with strength. It was put forth by Darwin and Darwinism for having the fittest genes for that particular time period. So fittest might mean smartest. Fittest might mean most colorful. Fittest might mean lots of things. Whatever allows you to survive to the next level. And so absolutely in this situation, survival of the fittest, because those boys that went first in this situation, whatever genes made them go first were the genes that that allowed them to survive, to then have children in the next, to survive to the next generation. So yeah.
Yeah, that's some custom, isn't it? You know, I guess certainly, you know, if we look through history, even if we look through history within the Western world, so just kind of
Right.
looking, you know, over this way, it's that, you know, it's really been about, you know, who's been in power as to how, you know, sex and sexuality has been viewed and what's right and what's not. So you know, looking at, you know, if it's the church that's been in power, or if it's the Romans or the Greeks or whoever,
Right.
they all have very different views, didn't they? You know, and you know, and that's kind of been the norm of the time, if you like, or the acceptable way at the time.
When I was taught about Alexander the Great conqueror, I was taught that he had a best friend who traveled with him on the back of his horse. More and more research, there's probably very little question that he had a boyfriend that was on the back of his horse with him, that slept in the tent with him. But that was absolutely unacceptable to teach in the conservative place of Utah where I grew up. You know, my sex ed that I had in school was abstinence only. The sex ed that I was taught in school was not about condoms, was not about STDs. It was abstinence only until marriage, and more so in the culture that I grew up. Boys, the majority of boys in my area were Mormon, were LDS, Latter-day Saints, and they at 18 went off on missions, and then they would come back at age 20 and then would marry an 18-year-old that they met within a few months. As they came back from their missions, they were handed a packet to read on the airplane back. And in that packet, it said that a 30-year-old unmarried man was a menace to society.
Wow.
And their job was to make sure to come back at 20, and you have 10 years, but really you have 6 months, and that you should be absolutely abstinent unless you're married to the person. Right now, there's a big push in evangelical Christianity in America for what's called purity culture, where you're not even supposed to kiss somebody unless you are in a committed relationship with the intention of getting married. And it's called purity culture. And so, yes, your specific culture and who's in charge completely changes that. Versus when I was living in Vegas, there were many times that I was hired to perform magic shows and juggling at the AVN, the Adult Video and Film Convention, and I was hired to perform at swinger events where I would go to swinger clubs. Or there was one religion called the Raelians who I went to, and the women dressed as aliens, and it ended in an orgy. So I mean, there's every kind of style and matching and coupling and making it work depending upon where you go in the world.
And I mean, it's absolutely fascinating, isn't it? When, you know, I mean, obviously I work as a therapist in this area. So I
Right.
see the results of that, of, you know, the shame and the guilt and how that controls people. And, you know, this nonsense really of what's normal, because you can tell very much by, you know, what normal is what you've taught it's been, really, isn't it?
Right.
And you know, as we look at what is normal, you know, and how people describe that, it's very much about people just being themselves, isn't it? It's about finding
Right.
kind of what their thing is and trying to get rid of some of this kind of baggage, if you like, from the things that they have maybe been taught, or, you
Right.
know, kind of, or forced upon them, really, quite often,
Right.
isn't it? You know, it's the shame if you don't follow that way.
Right.
It's you know, and that's a big thing, isn't it? Shame. I think shame in probably all of those cultures is a factor.
Because we're taught absolute right versus absolute wrong. You know, I remember when I was a boy in Utah, uh, being gay was an absolute no-no. It was something that was just not tolerated, and they used to take children that were gay and send them on these forced marches through the deserts of Utah in summer camps for conversion therapy, to try and help them stop being gay. And it, you know, there was a huge suicide rate from it. But that was their push, and that was the
Mm.
culture there at that time. Now Utah has one of the highest gay populations and biggest prides per capita in the Western United States, as a pushback in response to that. Um, but yes, we have a lot of, this is the way, the only way, the right way. This is the culture, the way we do it here, no matter where you are. And I mean, humanity is much bigger than that.
Yeah.
And now with the internet, people can find different places and different cultures and different ways of being, to follow their own bliss, as Joseph Campbell used to say, follow your
Mm.
bliss, to find your truth, as long as you're not hurting anybody. Now, I grew up in I'm 40 now, and I grew up in the culture of Harrison Ford movies, where the answer is, you grab the woman and she says no, 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 and you kiss her until she gives in and says yes. And that was the romantic way of doing things in the Indiana Jones and Blade Runner, and you know,
Mm.
it's the the little boy says to the girl, "Will you kiss me?" She says no, and so you keep trying. And then when I was in junior high, we were suddenly taught no, no means no.
Mm.
You have to ask permission. You don't just go and kiss the girl and make her cry, right? Like little Jack Horner sat in the corner, right? But you have to ask, and no means no.
Yeah.
When I was in college, from junior high, high school, college, no means no was the answer.
Yeah.
But now the culture has shifted, that yes means yes, that only yes means yes, that you can
Mm.
only push forwards with somebody if they say yes, and that they can say no at any moment. And they're allowed to say no, and it must stop immediately. Have you talked about the yes means yes and no means no with T on your channel yet?
Yes.
I
Yes.
love I love
Yeah.
that example.
I mean, the video for that's gone viral, hasn't it? About, you know, the other
Yes.
who want a cup of tea. I'll put a link to that actually, in this, because it is such a great way that they do that. And it's yeah, the no means no, yes means yes, and of course it's an enthusiastic yes as well, isn't it?
Right.
It's not half-hearted yes.
Right.
Because I mean, it was so confusing. You know, I'm 45, so
Right.
you know, I kind of grew up in the same culture. I mean, I
Right.
was taught, you know, as a young girl that, you know, if a boy was really mean to you, then it meant he liked you,
That's
which
right.
is, you
Absolutely.
know, and when we look at that in kind of in the future in kinds of, you know, abusive relationships and things, you can kind of see how, you know, the meaner somebody is, the more it must mean that they like you, which of course is complete nonsense, isn't it? You
Well,
know.
because it used to be men were allowed to experience very few emotions. We're
Mm.
allowed to be hungry, angry, sleepy. That's hungry, angry, and sleepy. So if he's sleepy, he's asleep. If he's hungry, he's eating. And if he's angry, that means he likes you. You know, I mean, it was a very
Yeah.
strange world. So I'm glad that we're more open to more emotions now, and that's starting to be part of what we do. But yes, it was a confusing time, and consent and how to communicate about consent. Again, in my grandmother's generation, and I remember talking to her about this. Her job, she was culturally trained to say no. I mean, that was her role, was to say no all the time and make the man persist. And if she didn't say no, then she would be considered a slut, right? She was told
Absolutely. And
that she
sadly,
must
yeah, I
demur.
was, well, this is, I mean, I was speaking to my cousin's daughter actually yesterday about this,
Hmm.
and she's 14, and she was saying the same thing. You know, why is it that, you know, boys can do what they like and it's seen as good, and yet if girls do things, then, you know, they're seen as sluts? How do you kind of
Right,
navigate through that? You know, when you know, she says, as I get older, how do I navigate through that? And I was kind
right.
of, I said, well, you know, that this is kind of why I'm doing the things that I'm doing to, it's just that equality, isn't it? It's just having the same view for both sexes with things like
That's right.
this.
Well,
And
and there was a cultural shift that happened during World War II in the UK. At least I was taught that very often in the UK during World War II, it was the woman's job to make that if a man advanced, it was her job to say okay, but the woman very rarely advanced. In America, it was the woman's job to say no, no, and demur. And so when American soldiers came over and tried with British women, the British women didn't demur. They said, okay. And so you suddenly had all these American soldiers sleeping with British women and having children. And then the soldiers went home because the men were so excited. They were, for the first time, women weren't saying no. But the women thought that the men would protect their innocence and would only pursue if they had good intentions. And so that was a clash of two cultures where you had the two sides who were expecting the other to have good intentions.
that's never going to end well, really. No. It's very interesting, actually. I mean, I know I'm often asked about how you know, the British have this reputation having the kind of being quite, you know, standoffish and stiff upper lip and being, you know, kind of very prudish almost. And I'm often asked how I find that as I kind of come, I obviously work and teach a lot in the States. And it's very interesting because to me, it's like there's so many different states with so many different cultures
Right.
that
Yeah.
operate in so many different ways. But
Absolutely.
generally, it seems to me that, you know, kind of over here on the European side, you know, we tend to be a bit more free and easy about our views towards sex,
Right.
and the rights and wrongs behind it. And it's really interesting, although the kind of stereotype is that it's us Brits that are all a bit kind of stiff about it all.
Yeah, that's the joke, is the husband is with the woman and the wife, and he says, sorry dear, sorry, almost done, sorry,
So yeah,
just about
don't
there.
lie back and think of England, isn't it? You know, but
Right.
that, you know,
Well,
it's generally not the case. Certainly from the work that I do, that isn't the case. You know, it's it. I think we're kind of moving forward, and of course, it's about communication as well, isn't it? You know, it's about how, you know, couples are communicating with each other now as to being able to say what they want. So it's not just consent; it's about being able to communicate what's okay and what isn't, what they want and
right.
what they don't want, how they want things to be, you know, whether they want to try something new or not, and how that kind of then fits in with, there's so many different cultures. You know, the world is a real kind of, I don't know what the word is, you know, I think that the kind of, it's a melting pot of many things, isn't it? That kind
Right.
of all entwining together. And I think as we move forward culturally, you know, we're creating new cultures from mixing many cultures together, aren't we? And that's going to be interesting in terms of sex and relationships, how that kind of move forward. Hopefully, in a good way, you know, in the way that we've seen the gay movement be much more accepted now, whereas it wasn't. You know, certainly I'm looking, you know, as a kink-friendly therapist. The way that the kink community is being treated at the moment is very similar to how the gay community was, you know, only 20, 30 years ago. And we've seen a so, you know, hopefully, you know, just generally things will become more open and accepted as we move forward.
And that's, you know, part of how our brains work is after the age of 30, we kind of stop looking for new, and instead we pattern match. We just keep doing what we used to do. And that's, our brains kind of start to lock up at that point if we don't force them to change. And so knowing how to play and allowing ourselves to play and not being change averse is much harder after the age of 30, but there are lots of tools and techniques to do it. There was a Harvard Business School study on change strategies, and the primary reasons people are willing to change is to accommodate someone else, or they avoid change. They don't want change and they're willing to do a lot to avoid it, or they're willing to collaborate with someone, or they're willing to cooperate with someone. Cooperate is do what the person wants. Collaborate is come together to a decision. And some will only change if they're forced to change. Now, don't force someone. But knowing what your partner's change strategy is, being willing to include play, being willing to be in a safe space where only an enthusiastic yes means yes, knowing that there's no shame in doing it, because so often when we're raised in a culture of this is the way, we feel that if we try something new and we're bad at it or we don't like it, that we've somehow gone off a cliff and can never go back. That the play is safe. You know, this is why it's important for children's stories, Grimm's fairy tales and the like, to have and Disney stories, to have some death, so that when Bambi's mom dies, we deal with death in play before we deal with death in reality. You know, that we're allowed to try things and experience things, right? So it's that we have to throw off the shackles of this is the only way, and you know, we don't have to, but we can if we wish to. And yes, the world is allowing us to, instead of just interact with people in our small little circle, we're allowed to now interact with people on a world stage, and find other people like us, whoever we are, wherever we are.
And I think, you know, the internet, you know, has been a major influence on people being able to do that, because now whatever your thing is, whatever that may be, whatever your passion is in life, you know, whatever the way that you want to play, you can find somebody. There's bound to be a website or a chat group or something that can bring people together from all over the world, can't they? You know, that are either looking to change a set of beliefs or create a new set of beliefs, or, you know, find their dopamine, for example, wherever it is that they find it. And, you know, I guess, you know, the world is getting smaller, isn't it? Although it seems to be expanding. Beliefs and ideas are expanding, but actually to do that, the world has become smaller, primarily because of the internet. You know, here we are having this conversation with, you know, me in Yorkshire, England, and you're in Alaska. You know, it wouldn't have even been possible 20 years ago, you know, in this way, would it, you know? So, yeah. So any kind of, tell us a little bit about, you know, about your work, anything that you want to tell us about you before we kind of end our conversation today. Where can people find you and find out more about, because you are one fascinating guy, Paul. I mean, your list of credentials is pretty endless, isn't it? You know.
Well, it's because I'm interested in everything. I mean, the big takeaway for me is never stop learning, be interested in everything, be engaged in everything. We're only guaranteed one life. I don't know. We might have more lives. We might have a heaven. We might have a hell. I don't know. But we're guaranteed this life. And you deserve some happiness. I do, you do. We all deserve some happiness. Now, that happiness can't come at the expense of others, but we deserve happiness. And if there, and it's worth reaching for. You know, like I mentioned earlier, that Joseph Campbell talked about follow your bliss, and I absolutely believe that we need to struggle and strive to find our greater happiness and our greater bliss every day in our lives and in every element of our lives. Oh, it looks like somebody's coming down the road here, but enjoy that. If people want to find out more about what I do, find out more about my work. Hold on, hi there, good to see you. Find out more about my work, go visit mentalmysteries.com. That's my work as an entertainer, as a singer, juggler, magician, mentalist, all that good stuff. If you want to see my work as a corporate consultant and change agent, I mostly work for hospitals these days, but I've also been to Apple headquarters and Facebook and Disney Imagineering. But helpinghospitalsheal.com is that one. Soon I'll have one up called anthropologyoffice.com. But just reach out to me on whatever the social media is of the day, and I'd love to chat more.
Wonderful. I mean, I had such fun when I spent 2 days with you in Leeds. I mean, it was we covered so much, didn't we, in those 2 days? It was you know, everything from some mentalism to some just kind of philosophy, life stuff, really, that
Right.
you know, it was a great course. So I can highly recommend anybody, you know, even thinking about taking some of your trainings or just, you know, and as I say, your credentials speak for themselves. They don't need my recommendation, but, you know, it's always nice to put my 2 pence in. So thank you so much for spending the time. I know you're incredibly busy. So thank you so much for taking the time out and showing us a bit of beautiful Alaska as well, which I've never seen before.
It's stunning. I'm going to walk over here and go one more view of the precipice, if I can get you there, where we can see off into the distance. Let's see, I walked a bit too far, but yes, the other night I was sitting out here and drinking tea like few Americans do, and saw a moose walk by. I also, when my first day here, saw some bear scat. So was told to go inside because there were live bears about, and that's not something you want to get up and play with. And so here we are, just one more quick view of the wilds of Alaska out my back door, where I'm staying for the next couple of weeks, and then off to somewhere else beautiful and wonderful in the world. Go travel, go explore, follow your bliss, be happy.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for coming on. I guess, you know, the takeaway from that is follow your bliss, and that life is for living, isn't it? So wonderful. Thanks ever so much, Paul. So if you've enjoyed what you've seen today, and of course you have, because this has been a really interesting conversation, there are, of course, 8 other hosts that host the Hypnosis 247 Live Network. Shawn Michael Andrews being one of them, the world's fastest hypnotist, has got all kinds of interesting and amazing guests looking at areas of entertainment and street hypnosis. So don't forget to check out Shawn's show, and I'll see you next time on Trancing in the Sheets. Thanks for joining us.
Get ready.